Hi. Well, I decided I'm going to give this a try and see if you guys like it as a way to go through your material. And this gives me a chance to take each of your shots and do more than just chat about it and say, well, it'd be nice if you did this or nice if you did that. I can show you how to do those things, and we'll see if this can turn into a nice learning experience. This is going to end up being 3 parts, and that way each one won't be too long. You can take a break between them and come back and do the others. I'll use all of the material that I've gotten as of today, which is Friday, and we'll go from there. Okay, here's our first shot. Really nice portrait of this little girl standing here. The problem is, for me, that it feels like it's somewhat falling over. If I grab the ruler from the side and I run it along all of these streaks, you can see they're coming down crooked. That doesn't mean that the actual pillar is crooked. It's not. But it feels crooked. And some of these appear the same way. They're off just a little bit. So in order to get rid of that sense, here's how we can do it. We'll select everything. We'll go to Edit, Transform, and in this case we'll use Skew. Now what that does is put all these little handles on all of the corners. So I can straighten this up simply by dragging this corner over. There's not a lot, it's just a little. And I can do the same on this side to straighten this part. If I hit enter, it will take that, and now we've got a picture that feels a whole lot straighter. A couple of the other things I've noticed is, just due to the lighting on the site, there's a natural vignette that's occurring up in here and over here. I think it would be nice if it did it on this side, and we used it to help channel our view into the subject of this portrait. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take and make a duplicate layer. I'll make it a multiply layer, which is going to darken it by about a stop. Turn that into a layer mask. Now, most of you saw the video I put up on doing layer mask and selective editing, and this is exactly the same kind of thing. In this case, I'm going to reverse this. Now this layer mask is set to white, which means it's going to hide the lower part, which is our bright part. I want to do the exact opposite. I want to reveal parts of that. So I'm going to make this an inverted mask with Control I. Now it turned black. This now looks like the original. And with a white brush, set fairly low, it's only set at 28% in this one. Let's enlarge this a bit. Now I can very subtly, with each pass, darken some of this in order to help bring a little more attention to the little girl. So I'm going to take that, and then I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to see if I can tone down these highlights just a little. So I'm going to flatten that. Now what I'm going to do, I don't want to get rid of these highlights. They're kind of a natural, nice texture there. I just want to tone them down a little bit. So in each case, I'm going to pick a natural tone that's in that area. I'm not going to try to make up one. So I'm going to pick this natural shadow tone. Select my brush, and up here I'm going to tell the brush to darken. What that means is this brush now is only going to paint on its own color or anything lighter. It will not paint on anything darker than that. So I can come down here and just put a little bit of tone in there. It's not a lot, but it's enough to tone it down. I'm going to do the same thing in here. I'll pick up that gray for the sidewalk. My brush is still set to darken. And I can tone that down just a little. You barely notice it, but it can make a major difference. Let's look at the before and after using our snapshot. Here's the original. And there's our corrected one. So most of those changes are subtle, but I think they help us just a little bit. So let's go on to the next one. Here we have another nice shot from Balboa Park with this monumental thing. The student who did this said that liked the idea that this may look like some old ruins in the jungle, and I think that really, really works with this. What I would probably do is emphasize that a little bit more, and one of the starting ways I would do that is to crop it a little so that we don't have so much of this area that's an exact balance. In terms of weight, when you divide your space into equal spaces, what you're basically telling the viewer is that they have equal value. Well, I don't think the sky up here has equal value with this building, so I'm going to bring this in a little bit and force the issue to say, no, it's my building that has value, not the sky. So I'll take that, just hit enter to accept the crop. Still has a similar feel, but we've got more visual weight given to our building here. Then what I want to do is darken the sky just a little bit. And there are a couple of ways we can do that. One is a very interesting concept. Again, we're going to make a duplicate layer, and we're going to make that layer into a luminosity layer. What luminosity does is that it takes and changes the tones of the lower layer to match the tones of the upper layer. Well, right now they're the same piece, so nothing changed. But we're going to change that. And we're going to change it based on color. So we'll come to adjustments, black and white. When we click this, our main image remained pretty much the same, but if you look over here at your layers palette, this top layer is now a black and white layer. You're still seeing color because this bottom layer is the important one. It's just being influenced by the tones of the top one. So if I come up now and adjust those tones, we've got sky that has a lot of blue and some cyan in it. And I bring that blue down. Watch what's happening to the sky. And bring the cyan down a little bit. While I'm at it, I'm going to take this yellow. There's a lot of yellow in that building and lighten it just a hair. Now, I don't know if you noticed that, but when I did that, I not only lightened the building, but I lightened the foliage. One of the things you'll discover is that green foliage, we just automatically see it as green. But in point of fact, it's got lots of yellow in it. So when you're getting used to handling color, that's one of the things you'll have to remember. So we'll accept that. We've already done some nice things with the sky over here, but there was quite a flare from the sun, maybe on clouds over here, and I'd like to darken the sky just a touch, but I want to make it a natural blue. So I'm going to first of all flatten things so that I'm working on a base layer. Then I'll grab a darker blue, let's say here. That's now my foreground color. Come into the paintbrush, tell it to darken, just like we did with the highlights on the little girl. And remember, because it's set to darken, it will only paint on its own color or darker. And I want it to be a nice smooth gradient. So I'm going to use this very soft brush. And now we have a sky that's a little darker. We're concentrating on our main subject here. So let me enlarge this a little. And with a snapshot, let's see if we can tell the difference. So here's where we ended up. There's where we started. Okay, let's go on to another one. Here we have an interesting lighthouse shot from up at Cabrillo Point. So we've got a very nice leading line. You did a good job in the composition to bring up this leading line. It takes the eye right up into the lighthouse. But we've got, again, a whole lot of space up here that isn't doing much for us. It can be beautiful for a suntan, but a blank blue sky doesn't do all that much for a photograph. If you had a lot of white poofy clouds in the background and they sort of repeated the patterns in the buildings and all, they could be really cool. But here, it's just in the way. And one of the things that you also have to notice is right here, there's a lens flare because the sun is right off the edge of your lens. What you really need to do, if you don't already have one on your camera, get a good lens hood, the biggest hood you can put on it that is not vignetting your image. So I want to do two things. Number one, I'm going to eliminate some of this sky, but first, so I can do it evenly, I want to get rid of this flare. At the moment, I'm not worried so much about this one, but we'll get rid of this one. So we'll come over and we'll use the spot healing brush. We'll make our circle just a hair bigger than the spot. Click on it. Now it's gone. So now we'll come in and see if we can bring this down a little, to where we're really concentrating on that lighthouse. Now, this becomes the most important thing. We could enhance that a little bit more, perhaps. This is sort of intrusive in our picture. So let's see if we get rid of that. We don't want to totally get rid of this curve into it. Perhaps that's even a little better. And if we wished, we could now come back and fill in the sky, just like we did over the Balboa Park instance, with a darken brush. Let's make a nice, big, soft brush out of this. And now we've got a much smoother looking piece. So let's look at a before and after here. Here's where we are now. There's where we started. Okay. On to the next one. This is a really nice flower picture, but I think we can make it even a little bit nicer by doing a couple of things. Again, we've got a whole lot of negative space over here that is kind of mysterious and interesting in the background, but it's taking us away from this flower. This flower is our photograph. That's the main thing we want to look at. We don't want anything that's going to distract us from that flower. So let's see what we can do to correct that. And the first thing I'm going to do is to get rid of some of that background. And you can see with the grid set to our third breakdown, this now is putting a lot of this interest right in that more visually appealing area. So let's see if we can get our format back a little bit. Okay, we're going to take that. Now, there are two more things I want to do with this. Number one, I want to darken this background a little so this stands out some more. But before I do that, some of this is just a little bit soft, and I want to sharpen it for the final output. And I'll do that now so we can see how we did it. If we go into Filters, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, this is the sharpening approach that is used most often because it's one of the more controllable and one of the best ways to see what's happening. So let's take a look at what it means. Remember, in the digital world, sharpening looks at an edge and it decides how abruptly the edge makes a transition to something else, another color, another tone. So here, for example, right along this edge, it's fairly sharp. It's an abrupt line. But here, it's softer. It's not so sharp. So when we solve this, one of the things we have to look at is what is the difference there. Threshold is how much of a difference between one tone or color and another does there have to be before Photoshop thinks it's an edge. Well, I'm going to say 0, so it will take everything. The higher this number, the greater the difference has to be before Photoshop will deal with it. The radius is from that edge. How far out is the effect going to go in pixels? I want to keep it tight, so I'm going to keep this radius at 1 pixel. The amount is how much of a change in percentages from each tone. How much darker is the darker side, how much lighter is the lighter side, and that's going to help us determine what that difference really is. So I'm going to go through and do some changes here, but first I want to do one thing to set us up. Come down here to the Layers palette and make a duplicate layer. We're only going to sharpen one of these, and that duplicate layer will let us blend back. So let's come back now to our unsharp mask and watch what's happening. I'm going to pull this down to where I can see this area. The ideal way to do this is to look at this at about 100% and find out, first of all, what is a good amount to make that really stand out. Well, 100%, 160%, you can see really has sharpened up these droplets, the edges of the petals, all of that. But to apply that much at one time has a tendency to create some artifacts. So I'm going to come down to maybe a half or a third of that. I'm going to make it about 50%. Apply it, and then I'm going to come back. When I click on the filter, it now is going to remember the last thing I did and what those settings were. So I can apply that 50% again. Now I'm applying 50% on 50%. Remember, it looked like about 150 or 160% looked good. So I'm going to do this 3 times. I'm actually going to do it 4 times. And I'm starting to get some real artifacting, some haloing going on. So how do I deal with that? I come down here to my layers. I look at the opacity. And I can bring this back down to get rid of that artifacting and find a good place in here where I've got a nice sharpening that isn't overt. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to take that. Now I'm going to flatten this. Now I'm going to deal with this background. And I'm going to do it the same way we did with all of the others. We'll start with a multiply layer. Ooh, that looks nice in there. So, actually, that's not bad on some of the other parts. So I'm going to back this off a little. There we go. I'll make a layer mask. Now what I could do here is use a black brush and just bring back the flower. Remember, when the layer mask is white, it is now hiding what's beneath it, and if I'm going to reveal that, I need to paint in black. For me, for this kind of thing, and this is purely a personal choice how you're doing this, I prefer generally to paint the dark back in rather than to paint the light back in. So I'm going to reverse this mask or invert the mask rather, with a Control-I. And now this turned black. So with a white brush, I can now start painting that back in. I can do it very subtly. My brush is now set to 28%. I'm going to bring that up just so things happen a little faster, to about 50%. Now, if I want to increase that effect, if I make a duplicate of this multiply layer, everything is duplicated. The multiplication part of it, the amount of the effect. So I'm going to drag this down, duplicate that. You see what happened? Here was the first multiply layer. Here's the second. Now I've really toned this down some. If that overly darkened the flower a little, I can click on this layer mask, change the color over here to black, and now I can lighten that back up a little. And now we have our rose looking a little different. So let's see if we can see the difference here. Here was the original. Nice shot as it was. Here's what we've done with it.